Anson Dorrance, the GOAT, recently retired from his 47-year career at the University of North Carolina, where he accumulated a record 21 national championships. Anson joined us to talk about his teams, his players, the Tar Heel culture, and believe it or not, some pickleball. From his favorite players, which include St. Louis's own Lori Chalupny, Michelle Akers, and of course Mia Hamm, Anson takes us through his journey of some of the secret sauce that led to his legendary success. Let's go. Aw, that's a good one for Sunday morning. Soccer Mom Sunday.
Soccer Mom Sunday.
Carolina. Now, if you haven't read, which I know people, you can actually see the title of the episode. The song Carolina will kind of hint to who our guest is.
Yeah, if you...
if it doesn't, then you need to go do homework.
Yeah, I mean, recent statistics show that apparently 52% of Americans read at a sixth grade level, which still means they can read the title of our show.
Yes. So should we go straight there? You want a little update? Usually you and I talk for about 10 minutes, but I don't want to keep our guests waiting. What do you want to talk about? And then we got to go to Carolina.
Yeah, no, I just real quickly, I want to, because obviously as the producer kind of sitting behind the Great Oz curtain.
Did you just pull rank on me?
Well, I just, you're the host. You're the name. You're the face. you're the face of this podcast,
okay.
Right? Of this audio podcast. No, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's listening because it's, it continues to grow. Anytime you can, if you get a chance, if you haven't already, hitting that subscribe, and possibly write a review for us. It just does a lot of things on the backside that enable us to keep bringing on guests like the guest today. And, we're super thankful for all the support. So just kind of giving you a little bit of homework before we get you entertained here over the next X amount of minutes, TBD. So, Miss Cease, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Yeah. So, every time I turn around, which is so antithetical to what I grew up with there was no women's soccer coverage, and it was hard to be a fifth grader and not knowing much of anything about Michelle Akers or Ruth Harker, who's here in St. Louis. And then, if you just scroll through the news right now, on one of the sites I like to look at is Attacking Third. You can find them on Instagram, I'm sure TikTok too. And they do a great job covering women's soccer, the NWSL back in action, just like MLS. Denver's getting the 16th team. Naomi Girma, breaks the world transfer record going to Chelsea in terms of dollar amount. The soccer tournament, the TST, is expanding from 8 to 16 teams because they're we like to watch women play soccer. And, one of the pioneers for me, right, of all of that is the guest that we have on now. And young ones, if you're in your car listening with your parents, do a little thing called Google and look him up. His name is Anson Dorrance. Anson, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. One of the most, along with Michelle Akers, probably somebody I've been the most excited to talk to.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
It was great to have you back in. For anybody who doesn't know, the MAC Herman Trophy Awards every year, about usually the first weekend in January, over at the MAC downtown in St. Louis. And of course, our Mr. Soccer, Bill McDermott, is usually the MC. He does a great job. And you were able to come and talk with him at the end. I really think they should have given you guys a lot more time. I enjoyed the conversation that you had. I just wanted to hear your thoughts a little bit on coming into St. Louis and talking a little bit about where St. Louis considers it the soccer capital of the United States. I know you worked in a part of the country that had a different kind of soccer capital when it came to women's soccer, but how was it for St. Louis other than being really cold?
Well, no, honestly, anyone who knows the game at the highest level in the history in the United States knows about St. Louis. I mean, so it was a stretch when I was in college where St. Louis was dominant in everything. I mean, they were competing at a very high Division I level. They were competing at a very high NAIA level with the different schools in St. Louis and its community. But also we knew of, the Kios and the history of the game going back to, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and the United States upsetting England. So anyone that knows anything about the history of the United States knows all about St. Louis. And since I was at the University of North Carolina competing at a collegiate level, we knew again about the great collegiate teams, not just in St. Louis itself, but in the community and the elite players that came out of that place. So for me, the history of the game goes back, in my opinion, to St. Louis because I know all about the history. And then what was cool for me is I was playing age group soccer for years, over 50, over 55, over 60, over 65. And invariably, the teams we would play in the championship games or along the way would be some of the great teams from St. Louis. And so for me, I know all about the history of the game there. We've recruited actively there. We've sent, Lori Chalupny back to your community to help continue to grow the game. So for me, it was a real honor to be invited to the MAC. And then the coolest thing was, I think I was invited to be the keynote with Bill, like in September or something. And I'm sure they invited me because of the number of my kids that have won the MAC, and also the times I've been invited back to be a part of celebrating one of my kids that was a semifinalist. And then through a wonderful series of, to some extent luck, but also excitement, I'm at the MAC, and my team has just won the national championship. And they've picked our leading scorer, who was also the national leading scorer, to be there with me, and the new head coach at North Carolina, my former assistant, Damon Neha. So for me, it was a celebration on so many levels. And they even allowed, well, they flew my wife in with me, which was also really, really enjoyable. So for me, that was just a fantastic trip.
That's awesome. And to do due diligence for people who didn't look it up, Anson Dorrance, I feel like Anson, when it comes to, what you just talked about is exactly correct. Men's soccer, I think St. Louis has a great history. When it comes to women's soccer, though, I tended up looking at the coast. You look over at North Carolina, you look over in Seattle on the West Coast. You yourself at UNC, 21 NCAA championships, the most by a head coach in any Division I sport in college athletics history. I know you retired in August, which is good for you. Sad a little bit for the game. In terms of looking at that, you mentioned Lori Chalupny, of course. We did get a few people here from St. Louis. One of the things that I remember when I quickly got to talk to you at the MAC was the fact that you called out Lori Chalupny in a very special way. We, of course, are dear to Lori. She's been on other radio shows. She's come up in the booth with St. Louis City SC to kind of help analyze the game a little bit. Super humble, played in the TST, has her 2 kids, coaches here at Maryville University. But you remarked to me about something that made Lori stand out to you as one of the maybe greater players that you've ever coached.
Yeah, I mean, whenever people ask me when they talk about the great players that we've trained at North Carolina, Chalupny is always a part of the conversation. In fact, not just among the greatest. I always put her in the top 5. And the thing I absolutely loved about her is her range between her best game and her worst was the tightest of any player I've ever coached. In other words, she was always phenomenal. She wasn't like, great one day, good the next, and average the following day. No, she was just extraordinary. She had a consistency level that just separated her from all the North Carolina grades. And so for me, I absolutely loved coaching her. And you're right, she's just wonderfully humble. And even her origin story for us is a great story because we were obviously recruiting all the best players in the country like we try to do every single year. And the odds of us getting all the great players is remote, but it doesn't mean we're not going to try. So we try to identify the 5 or 6 best players in America, and then we start chasing them, and invariably we strike out to Stanford, obviously not just a great soccer program but a great school, UCLA if they're West Coast as well, certainly Southern California, to schools in the ACC that are also exceptional. So we don't always get to, the best every single year, but this particular year we were actually hosting the first iteration of the WSA, the First Women's Pro League, and they were playing on our field. So their season for this the first iteration of the Carolina Courage. It was played basically on our field at the University of North Carolina. So we were thinking, boy, this is a recruiting bonanza for us. We're going to go out and get the best 5 kids in the country to come in, and we're going to recruit them. They're going to watch, an NWSL game here. And of course, in that particular year, Chalupny was one of the best. And so we brought her in with 4 other wonderful kids. And it was sort of interesting because we brought her in, and that particular year, the U.S. women's national team was on strike. So what was happening is they decided that, well, they still wanted to go to this event. I think it was the Algarve in Portugal, which is an annual event where they bring in the top teams in Europe. The United States is usually invited in. And this particular year, the U.S. women are on strike. So they're bringing in a lot of great youth players. And of course, they're also bringing in some college players that weren't on the national team, but they were the next best collection of kids because the national team was on strike. And all of a sudden, we're having a great weekend, and I can sense that we're just getting all these kids to commit, and I can see the smiles in their face. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to get all these kids. And then I'm looking at Chalupny, and you're right. She's very quiet and sort of introspective, a bit introverted. And I'm thinking, gosh, I don't think Lori's really interested, but that's okay. We did our best. I don't know where she's going to go, but we wish her well. And so now I'm doing a closing interview with Lori and her dad, and we've got the commitments from all these great kids coming in, and I just felt that we had lost Kalupnik. She's sitting in my office. She's sitting next to her dad, and her dad starts talking about the weekend, how much fun it was, and everything. And she said that he was telling me, when I went to the airport to pick up Lori, she had flown back from the Algarve. Obviously, she had a great team competing for the United States. And I don't think our team had done particularly well in this event because obviously this wasn't our national team. This was, a lot of college kids that didn't make the original national team roster. And Lori was maybe the only or one of the few high school kids that were there with these college kids. And of course, the college kids that were invited to represent the United States in the Algarve, since the national team was on strike, were from across the country. I mean, college kids from all these schools, the Stanfords and the UCLAs and, the Dukes and the Virginias and all the great teams, the Penn States, the Florida States. I mean, the kids from across the country. And the dad's telling me that she gets off the plane. And obviously, I guess, when you're introverted, you just don't speak much. And the dad picks her up and she gets in the car with him, and this is the dad telling me the story in my office. And the dad's looking at me and he said that Lori says, "Hey, Dad, there's something different about those Tar Heels." And I was thinking, my heart started to beat a little faster. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this has to be a good sign. And then he's saying, and again, Lori's not saying a thing. And the dad is saying, he said, "You know what, Dad, in those games, and obviously we didn't have the national team. We're playing all these national teams. But he said those Tar Heels don't know how to quit. They were fighting and fighting and fighting to the bitter end." And now I'm thinking, holy cow. And then sure enough, she commits on the spot. So of course my heart is soaring like a hawk as I've picked up this absolutely wonderful player. And you're right, it's almost humble to a fault, but she recognized something that I consider very special among the kids that we train. Yep, the mentality of the average Tar Heel is off the charts. And just like this year, I mean, our team on paper was a very ordinary team this past fall. We had one returning starter from the previous year. The previous year, we had an incredible team in terms of talent. 11 of those kids signed first division pro contracts. 9 more jumped into the transfer portal, and we lost them. And that team should have been competing for a national championship, but we were taken out in the quarters by BYU in a game where we were winning 3-0 at the half. You never lose a game when you're winning 3-0, and yet BYU came back and fought us back, and they beat us 4-3 in overtime. And so we had only 8 players, healthy players in the spring. And yet out of the ashes of that team, emerged this team that won the national championship, and I was just so proud of them. Lori's right. There is something different about those Tar Heels. And I'm very proud of that. We have an incredible, certainly, legacy and tradition, but there's a mentality, when you put on the jersey that just separates you, in my opinion, because we won so many games we shouldn't have won just because the kids fought to the death to try to make sure that they left everything on the field. And this year's team was a wonderful example of that.
Here at Alice Dental, we are a lot like you. We are all from St. Louis, we all have kids, and we take pride in catching potential issues earlier so that it makes it easier on everyone. Our early prevention techniques help save families in the long run. Not only are children under 2 free, we have a successful track record with special needs kids. And most importantly, we have chocolate-flavored toothpaste. Alice Dental, your kids are in good hands.
Of that.
Ganson, I reached out to some players before this interview that you either coached or maybe coached against, or at least were touched by your impact on the game and all of your years of coaching young players. One is Casey White, if you remember her. I believe she was Lori's roommate. And she told me that, a good thing to ask you about, and I think this is a perfect segue, is when Lori was talking about the Tar Heels being different, right? There's just something different. Casey was telling me that you added core values into your program probably around the time that maybe those two were playing for you. Can you tell us a little bit about what those were and maybe how those helped build what that kind of Tar Heel philosophy was that made people like Lori Chalupny go in and go, there's something different here and I want to be a part of it?
Well, yeah, if we talk about our program, and obviously I'm interviewed regularly about the program and its success, I always talk about 3 different platforms. The first thing I always talk about is the competitive cauldron. We take data collection very seriously. We also use it to try to drive performance. And it's sort of interesting, and you'll appreciate this, especially since your show is titled Soccer Mom. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's the perfect title for what I'm about to share. We had the preeminent sociologist on our campus basically come in to speak to all the coaches one year. And I really appreciate my athletic director, because what he knows, being on a college campus, is we have resources all over the place. And we have experts that can tell us about all kinds of things. And he does his best to try to find these experts to educate us on a regular basis. And so in this particular year, he brings in, again, our preeminent sociologists to tell us, who we were coaching, so that we could have a better idea on how to manage our cultures and how to recruit effectively. And so we bring this guy in, and I don't remember everything he shared, but there's no question I remember his first couple slides. So he's there with a PowerPoint. His first slide at the top has the title of the year of this slide, and the year was 1969. And of course, I will never forget that year. That was my high school graduation year. And on his slide, he's got this kid coming home from school, and he's got all F's on his report card. And he's showing it to his parents, and his parents are screaming at him. And then all of a sudden, the slide shifts to the date that that we were speaking. This gentleman was speaking to us in, which was 2012. And then all of a sudden, the year has obviously changed, and now the kid comes home with all F's on his report card. And what's happening now? The parents are screaming at the teacher.
Oh.
So what this preeminent sociologist was trying to tell us is times have changed. And I read a great book by William Damon one year, way back, called Greater Expectations. And he was another preeminent, psychologist, sociologist. And he was talking about the incredibly destructive impact that was occurring in the United States because of a diluted understanding of how you construct self-esteem. And so what the diluted American parent was thinking is, I'm going to construct incredible self-esteem among my children. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to be really nice to them. I'm going to praise them for everything. And I'm going to make sure they don't experience the chaos of the universe. So I'm gonna protect them from failure, and I'm just gonna make sure that they are happy, and that's gonna build an incredible self-esteem because they're gonna be so proud of themselves. I'm gonna compliment them at every turn, and anytime they have any sort of struggle, I'm gonna make sure I protect them from feeling like they're failures or something. And so he's talking about this. William Damon is in his book Greater Expectations, and one of the worst things you can do, honestly, is coddle your kids. In fact, one of the best things you can do is allow them to experience life, allow them to understand what standards are, allow them to understand that it's okay to fail. What's not okay, though, if you fail, is to sort of lie there feeling sorry for yourself all day. No, I mean, develop some resilience, take responsibility for your failure, and then get up and get to work. And so the two slides our sociologist was sharing with us was the parents that blame the kid. If there's something going on in your life and you've screwed up, take responsibility. All F's on your report card, you're to blame. Get to work. As soon as you come home, start doing your homework. Be responsible. Turn your stuff in on time. Stay awake in class, as opposed to the next generation, which was the generation I was recruiting, which is, yeah, if the kid doesn't play, it's my fault. And and I can feel this among the modern parent. And obviously, we're in an incredibly privileged situation at the University of North Carolina. Every kid on my roster, at a minimum, is the best player on the team she's coming from. So the parents have never seen their kid fail in this game. But I often have not just the best player on every team they've come from, but oftentimes I have the best player in the state they're coming from. If I've recruited well, and we recruit pretty well, I've recruited the best player east of the Mississippi. Sometimes I've recruited the best player west of the Mississippi. And then if I'm lucky in the Lori Chalupny years, I've recruited the best frigging player in the country. So when these kids come into my environment, trust me, they're not kicking everyone's rear end in practice. They are hanging on by their frigging fingernails.
Wow.
But what happens when these kids call home in preseason? They're, mom and dad, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And of course, they're lying through their teeth because what they're afraid to tell their parents is, oh, by the way, mom and dad, boy, did I have my ass kicked today. you know, I mean, that's the last thing any of them are saying. So all of a sudden, the weekend rolls around. We have our first opening game, and their kid not only doesn't start, but doesn't even play. And now, of course, who's at fault? Well, I'm at fault because clearly their little darling, who was calling them every night, telling them how great she was doing, wasn't telling them the truth. But what's their source of information? Well, this poor kid that wants their parent to continue to put them in the hero category. And they're afraid to tell their parent, oh my gosh, yeah, by the way, we had a 1v1 today. I didn't win a game. And they're not sharing any of that. Oh, and by the way, heading, I forgot to tell you this. At North Carolina, we actually have to head the ball because on all of my youth teams, we didn't have to
Hey,
because all the parents were so afraid about brain damage and everything else that, no, we never had to head a ball. So guess what? Now I have to head a ball. Mom, I don't like to head the ball. But they're not saying that. They're not saying anything. What they're doing is protecting themselves from the possibility they're going to disappoint their parents, and now, of course, the parents are furious.
Hey, Coach, this is JB here. I wanted to kind of ask a question along the lines of, kind of player evaluation in regards to the context that you're laying out now. And just kind of want to zoom out a little bit and talk generally speaking from a recruiting perspective. Over your career, obviously, with the success that you and the program had, it was pretty easy to get the top tier players to at least be interested in your program. That was a given. What I'm really curious about is some of the nuance, some of that it factor. It's one of my favorite questions on these shows is asking individuals like yourself, like when you watch a player play or, maybe it's when they come off the field, what are some of those, the it factors that you look for that really get you excited and want to really more aggressively try to recruit a particular player like a Lori or others?
Well, honestly, the story I was telling was sort of getting to that point because since these kids coming in, because of the way they're being raised, have no sense of standards because they've never really had to collide with someone that was faster than they were, or more skillful, or better. The quality we always look for is competitive fire. In other words, do they compete? In fact, my favorite moments when I'm evaluating an elite player is to see their team behind or see them involved in a tie game. Because let me see what I want to see what emerges. Because yes, trapping, passing, shooting, dribbling, and heading, ball mastery is absolutely vital if you want to play at the highest level. Your athletic platforms, your speed, your quickness, your agility, your vertical jump, these are all absolutely critical factors. But after a while at our level, all those sort of elements are involved in every game they play. Is that the margin of victory? No, it's not. The margin of victory is basically your will, your competitive fire. And so for me, that's what I'm looking for. I want to see someone that can hit a button and then go at a different level in a close game and be the margin of victory. So the point I was going to make with this story about, these poor little darlings are coming in and, getting destroyed, is the Cauldron is a 28 category competition among all the players in every practice. Now, you don't do all 28 in every practice, but through the course of the season, you've got a ranking based on all these different categories. Now, obviously, for you two that understand something about the game, you would fully understand, yeah, we bring the kids in and we've got these lasers basically on a 30-meter strip where the first later starts the stopwatch, 10 meters out is your acceleration time, and then 30 meters out is your meters per second time. So we've got a ranking on the kids on the team that are the fastest, kids on the team that have the best acceleration. We do vertical jump tests to sort that out. We've got beep tests to sort out their cardiovascular capacity. And we've got every kind of physical measure, but we also have every kind of technical measure. If you want to know who the leading scorer is on the teams you're about to watch, you don't even have to watch them play, in my opinion. You can get a radar gun out and have all the kids in the field shoot the ball into a net with a radar gun behind it. And I promise you this, that an overwhelming high percentage of every time you do this with any team, the kid that scores the most goals hits the ball the hardest. And so what do we encourage for our girls? Well, live on a wall. In other words, find a wall, shoot the ball up against it as hard as you can with both feet.
Wall ball.
Exactly right. I mean, that's going to make all the difference if you want to be in a leading scorer or a center back that can ping a ball, 40 yards over the top or change the point with a nice 40-yard driven ball. So these all factors also work into everything they're doing in practice. Yes, we have 5 different 1v1 ladders. We have the classical facing each other 1v1. We have back to pressure 1v1s. We have 1v1s with live goalkeepers and big goals. We have 1v1s against traffic cones. We have every conceivable kind of 1v1 battle because, in my opinion, your ability to beat a player off the dribble and defend against that player is extraordinarily important if you want to become an elite player. And so all these things are measured in my program. So you've got a grade at the end of the year on basically where you are. And it's shocking how many of our kids that finish the top 4 in the competitive cauldron that end up winning gold medals in the Olympics and winning world championships. There's a direct correlation between how much you win in practice and how much we're going to win in games and how many of my kids are going to end up making the U.S. full national team. So this competitive cauldron thing is very important. But the thing that it addresses in a really interesting way is basically it solves the no standards problem, the every kid wins a trophy problem, the parents screaming at the teacher problem when the kid has all F's. Basically, what it does is it sort of shifts the responsibility from the coach to the player. So, yeah, if you want to play, perform. Where do I get to watch you perform to decide whether or not you're going to play and how many minutes you get? Well, there's this thing called practice. You want to play, kick everyone's rear end and in practice. That'll get you on the field. And so for me, that was very simple. But to get to your question, Jen, about what we're talking about here, yeah, the core values are also really important. You've got to have a balance between this fury, certainly in a women's culture, and care and concern. So this is where the human being comes in, and honestly, and people know this that know anything that studied our program. The top award at our athletic banquet is not the MVP. And obviously, if you look at the list of our MVPs in our history, gosh, what an extraordinary
Right.
list. Mia Hamm, Christine Lilly, Cindy Parlow, Crystal Dunn, Emily Fox. And I mean, it's a who's who of the greatest players of all time. That's not the top award at our banquet. The top award at our banquet is the Kelly Muldoon Award for character. And so, what is this character award that I consider so important that the MVPs, basically don't overshadow it? It's basically who you are. And the character piece for me is absolutely vital because the character piece is getting into the weeds and sort of getting to where the William Damon, greater expectation book is getting to. Because if we want to be extraordinary human beings, we've got to live a life of character where basically we want to be living for a purpose. We want to basically sacrifice ourselves for the team. We don't want to have a parent upset that I'm not playing and then lobbying to get the kid to play because for the parent, that's the most important thing.
Sure.
I mean, one of the things that you guys are seeing, and I'm sure when you've interviewed coaches, they've told you this, is the transfer portal is almost like a surrender. Yeah, or basically a transactional relationship. I want to get more money, or I want to play more. I don't want to have to fight, the kids on this roster. I just want to go someplace and play maximum minutes and not have to work as hard. I mean, it's basically it's almost like the worst aspects of the self-esteem culture turned into official, athletic um, uh, basically policy, which is ridiculous. So here's what we do. We've got 13 core values. And in the old days, and I hate to admit this, but I'm going to be completely frank. I'm one of these guys that just reads and reads and reads. And I was reading all these business books, and they were telling me, you have to create a culture where everyone's, living the culture. And so I had all these insipid statements like, we don't whine or we work hard. And
Yeah, I
I'm
heard you hate
slapping.
whiners.
Yeah. Well, no, exactly. That's the point I'm going to get to. So we've got all these different things. And honestly, I thought this was ridiculous. Nothing was really happening with me just spouting these things out. But, and I think I shared this at the MAC about the woman studying Russian literature at Columbia. Did I share that with the room?
I think you did, but the people obviously weren't all there. Share that again.
Yeah, no, this is a great story. So again, I love to read, and I try to read the New York Times Sunday thing all the way through from them, all the pages, all the supplements. And I'm reading the New York Times Magazine, and there's this woman that's been accepted to Columbia to study Russian literature for a PhD. And just before she gets there, Columbia hires this Russian exile poet by the name of Joseph Brodsky. Brodsky comes in and he brings his PhD candidates together and he says, okay, I want you guys to memorize reams of Russian poetry and Russian literature. And they're all looking at each other. The students are, and they can't believe this. So they get together as a cabal following the meeting, and they say, this guy's crazy. I don't think he understands where he is. I mean, he's at Columbia. We are one of the elite institutions academically in the world. And this guy is sending us back to elementary school where we're expected to memorize poetry and literature like some, fifth and sixth grader. Let's go in and tell him he's crazy and let's refuse. So they all go in there. I'm sorry, Professor Brodsky, I don't think you understand where you are. We're an elite academic institution. We're not going to memorize this stuff for you. And he says, well, okay, if you don't, none of you guys get your PhDs. And of course, they leave the room and they all got to work. In this article, this woman is telling all of us that read it that this was transformational. That all of a sudden, for the first time in her life, because the literature was so extraordinarily powerful, she felt what it was like to be in a Russian winter, and she had never been to Russia. And then also in her cerebral conversations with her classmates, This had already become a part of her cerebral fabric. Why? Because she could reference it immediately because she had memorized it. And all of a sudden, it changed everything about her understanding of Russian poetry and Russian literature. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to take all of these ridiculous statements I've made, and we're going to try to transform these young women. So you're right. The first quote that every woman in the program has to memorize is the George Bernard Shaw quote about being a force of fortune instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. We have 13 of these. And if you guys right there on your cell phones will just type into your web browser UNC Women's Soccer Core Values, you will see all 13. They all start with a statement, and the statement is about what the core value is all about. But then it goes on to describe what's important about this core value. And then they give you the quote that every one of our kids memorizes. Whenever I meet with them, which is 3 times a year, the first part of the meeting is a recitation of the 4 core values that they have to recite to me before the rest of the meeting begins.
Whoa.
And so then they get a grade on the core value. If they memorize it perfectly, obviously they get an A plus. And the terrifying thing for the incoming freshmen, the upperclassmen obviously know what's going to happen. But the terrifying thing for the freshmen that come in is, and they're told this, and some of them ignore it. And then what we have is a freshman versus seniors, a sophomore versus juniors performance on a core value that the team you're competing against not only gets to pick, but they get to pick the athlete that they think is the most slack. And here's what's really interesting, and you guys will understand this, especially if you if you've been involved with girls teams or women's teams. They know exactly who to pick.
Yes, that's true.
Yep, yep. They know the girl that hasn't done a bloody thing, and then all of a sudden, in front of her teammates, the humiliation begins. And for the freshmen, now the upperclassmen, obviously, when the seniors are pretty safe, although some of the freshmen do their research and they will certainly end up picking, the right senior to take apart and humiliate publicly. But the battle is hilarious, and we obviously try to make it fun, and we tell them that has to be performed. And then I've seen some amazing performances because the seniors will get together, and it doesn't matter what senior they pick. They all have this sort of rap video performance where they're all dancing and they're all saying every fifth word, to help their teammate through the memorization thing. And it's immensely entertaining. But the statement that we're trying to make is this is important. And what's fabulous is it is important because the teams that basically do the best in their core values are the ones that win national championships. There is a direct correlation. And I'm writing a book right now with a former tenured professor from Georgetown that's now teaching here at the University of North Carolina. She and I do some leadership speaking together in our business school. And what we're excited about is basically what's going to be in our book is to show the direct correlation between the core value grades, because as I said, we have a peer evaluation twice a year where every girl on the team evaluates every teammate in every core value, and we do it numerically. If this is the best example on the team of someone that represents this core value, you're allowed to give the best example a 5. If you give someone a 4, they're an extraordinary example of this core value. If you give them a 3, they live this core value most of the time. If you give them a 2, they sometimes live this core value. If you give them a 1, they rarely live this core value. If you give them a 0, they never live this core value. So we're getting numerical data. And as you know, I mean, these girls are brutally honest with their teammates, especially since this is anonymous when they're filling this out. And so we have an incredible collection of, statements about how these kids are living or not living the core values. And of course, the kid that finishes on top is the Core Value Award winner. And we give one out in the fall, one in the spring. And boy, does this tell me what kind of team I'm going to have. Because, of course, the selfish girls are, certainly evaluated correctly by teammates, and their core values aren't very high. And then the extraordinary women, like the Chalupnys, are going through the roof because not only is she a great player, she's a young woman of extraordinary character. And so for me, there's a direct correlation between the character of your team and whether or not you have great success.
But let me ask you about the balance. Sorry to interrupt you. Balance of that. I'm just thinking about this is,
Sure.
My youngest kid is 8 years old, and I've got a 16-year-old who, is thinking about college soon. I feel like that's early, but it is what it is. How do you balance that though as a coach? So what if you have I looked up your core values, and you talk about integrity, collaboration, innovation. How do you handle the player that on a soccer perspective, he or she is an ass kicker. They go out, they're really great, but they suck on some core values. How do you balance that? How did you balance that as a coach then? Because you can go out there and perform, but they're not living up to core values, or vice versa. Even somebody who's not maybe your best on the field, but is leading in those core values.
You always want women of character on your team. You always want girls of character on your team. And if the girls of character are on your team and they're not playing, they're not going to destroy the team. So they are actually going to be good for the team. The dilemma with the great player that doesn't have character is eventually she's going to destroy your team. Now, at a collegiate level, this kid doesn't destroy your team in her first year. But eventually she's going to bring your team down. Because as she gets more comfortable in the environment she's in, she will be a destructive life force. And behind you and behind the positive people on the team, she's going to be just ripping everything apart. And you're going to lose games that you don't deserve to lose because she is this destructive force, behind the scenes. And so we even talk about this. We have coaches meetings at the University of North Carolina, and we address this with our peers, our fellow coaches across sports on this conversation itself. So I'm looking at a kid, and let's assume, and to be completely honest, I can't always tell the character of a kid that I've recruited until she gets here, because no coach will tell us the truth. They're all so eager to have
to get them recruited, right? Yeah, they want you to take them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So when we speak to a coach, rarely will they say, well, Anson, yeah, this kid's an ass kicker, but gosh, is he a pain in the ass. And boy, the mom just drives me up a frigging wall. And the dad, comes to games and screams at everyone, the refs, everyone, the other teams. He gets in fights with the other dads. I mean, so, kid's a great player, but you don't want this kid. Never do I hear that from a youth coach. If I'm recruiting a kid, all I hear about is how great the kid is, and then the kid comes in, and I'm going, holy crap. This kid's incredibly selfish. Is she talented? Yes. I could see that she was talented. But gosh, her teammates hate her. I mean, she's just behind the scenes. She's got, her own little clique. It's like the movies about mean girls. And every year, I guess there's a new mean girl movie because, that's the culture that some of our girls are raised in. You don't want that kid. But you don't realize it in the recruiting process. You end up recruiting them, and you start them, yeah. These are great players. And, yeah, their freshman year, they're going to help you win. But from then on, all they're going to do is their value is going to be diminished by their lack of character, and they're going to bring down the people around them. And so stay away.
Hey, Coach, you mentioned earlier that at the university, you and the other coaches at the other sports would regularly get together and go through these types of things, kind of alluding to kind of the North Carolina way. And I would hate myself if I didn't ask you this question about your time there working with the other coaches, and in particular, in the early 80s, you had a Mr. Dean Smith over on the men's basketball side. And at that particular time, there was a certain player that kind of changed the face of basketball forever, that being Mr. Michael Jordan. Can you talk a little bit about those early years at the university as you're getting ready to build what is clearly seen as a dynasty, but across the hall, the quote hall, you had a Dean Smith that you're working with, and he had the greatest player to ever play the game. What were those years like, and what did you glean off of Coach Smith or vice versa during those years?
Honestly, he was the prime mover for the competitive cauldron. I loved Dean Smith. Everyone did. He was one of these people. He didn't big time anyone. And what I mean by that is, he was a god on campus. And yet he would talk to all of us, and he would, say, "Hey, Anson, why don't you and your staff come over and watch us during a practice if you want to see, how we do things." And oh my gosh, I was thinking, are you kidding me? Of course we'll come to practice. And this is where I got the competitive cauldron. I'm there watching practice. I'm there with my staff, and all four of us are sitting there, and we have to sit in a certain part of the gym, and then we get there a little bit early because Dean Smith, hates it if any one of his players are late. So we're certainly not going to be late. So we get there early and we're sitting there, and then all of a sudden one of the managers comes up to us and hands each of us a piece of paper, and it's that day's practice. Uh, basically. Session. So to the minute, you can see what's happening in practice. And then every now and again, to the minute, a noise will go off, a beep from the scores table. And then all of a sudden they'll shift to a different set of exercises. And and he followed everything just to the T, so well organized. Even, the water breaks were timed. Noise would go off for the water break, and you would see all these players literally sprinting to the water, not sort of sloughing over there. They'd be sprinting to the water. They'd have their water break, and that 30 seconds later, another noise would go off, and then they sprint to the next section of the gym where they had to report to.
It's a little Pavlovian in reinforcement.
Yeah, but then the cool thing for me was seeing the way it was organized, because underneath every basket was an assistant manager with a clipboard. And you could see these guys, if it was a free throw shooting station, you would see them recording, free throw shooting percentages of everyone that shot there. And then under another one, the bigs would be playing 2v2 basketball, and you would see them recording, box outs and rebounds and putbacks and everything else. And so all across the gym, if there was something going on, it was being recorded. If there was a 3v3 scrimmage, winners and losers were recorded. 4v4, 5v5 full court, also that was recorded. I mean, there was so much data being collected in this practice. That's what I stole from Dean Smith and injected into my program. And then the other thing is, at the end of practice, Dean would bring the boys together, and you would see all these assistant managers sprinting to the scores table, and the head manager would be there. You would see him reaching out, grabbing all the clipboards, and then in those days, of course, he had a calculator. He didn't have a phone with a calculator on it. He had a calculator that you would see in an accountant's office, and they'd be, calculating numbers on everything. And then Dean's chatting with the boys. And then at the end of his chat, he'd turn around. By this time, the head manager had compiled that day's practice data based on where you finished in practice. And of course, the way you finished was assembling all the data in all the different categories. The first four guys were excused immediately, and they were whooping and hollering as they left the court because they were in the top four for practice that day, and they didn't have to do sprints. The other eight.
That's always a great motivator. No running.
Yeah. The other eight are lined up, at the end of the court, and it's the free throw line and back, the mid court and back, the other free throw line and back, and the end of the court and back. And then the next four only had to do 5 or 6. And then the last four, I assume, are running until the end of recorded time. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, I love the immediacy of the feedback. I love the implication that, okay, if you want to get out of sprints, you better be doing everything. Making your free throws, at least now would be making your three-pointers, defending well in the 2v2s and the 3v3s, 4v4s. 5v5s. I mean, the data he would assemble would be extraordinary. So for me, the competitive cauldron is something I stole from Dean Smith. But the other thing that I think I also stole from him is he does it differently than I did. But he would have a quote of the day. The quote of the day would be a one-line positive statement about something that the kids had to memorize before they came to practice. And then I think, and I could be wrong, but I think this is the case. He would have a quote of the day that everyone was expected to memorize. Then he would have a defensive emphasis of the day and an offensive emphasis of the day. And you had to be so well prepared and organized as a player coming into practice that you had all three memorized.
When you come to Ellis Dental, our spa-like treatment makes you wonder if you are actually in a dentist office. From the warm greeting to the modern design, massage chairs coupled with the heated pillows and blankets, your teeth will never be treated better. Your time is important, and as such, we never double book, we don't run late, and our all-female team provides a level of care and compassion to the experience. With over 750 five-star reviews, you can take it from our patients. You are in good hands.
And so, again, I do the character thing at a different level because, holy cow, and all of you guys know this. I mean,
Hey, Coach,
we're all different.
Jen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jen is chomping at the bit here because we know you've got some precious time. She has her own Jordan player that she wants to talk about a little bit and ask you a quick question.
Sorry, Anson, I didn't want to run out of time with us. When I think about a Jordan-like level player, I think about when I'm in fifth grade, and it's Michelle Akers. You quoted one point in time, she's a player without a weakness, but there's also somebody else that I think at least girls that are a little bit younger may know better, and that's Mia Hamm. To talk about a Jordan-level player, Mia Hamm, and I was told by Bill McDermott, who you talked to make sure I asked you to tell the quick story about how you found her, how you saw her, I think, training by herself. And for anybody out there who doesn't know Mia Hamm, you will see quotes when you see a quote that she said, "My coach said I run like a girl, and I said if he could run a little faster, he could too." This is the player we're talking about, and apparently you saw her, and something was really special about her training on her own.
Yeah, so I live between 10 and maybe 13 minutes from work. There's an accelerated path I could go. I go out to Sewell Elementary School Road, make a left on Ephesus Church Drive, and I go down that. Then I can turn down Martin Luther King and get to campus through some side streets. I don't always go that way. It's the fastest, but it's not really that scenic. And so this is in the second semester of Mia's senior year. I decided to go through this longer route. It goes through a park, a beautiful little park, a little Umstead park. And on some mornings, I just don't want to go the fastest way. I just want to, take a leisurely drive through a beautiful part of Chapel Hill, and I go through Umstead. This is in February. It's kind of cold out. It's kind of early in the morning. And I decided to drive through the park, and I'm driving through pretty slowly. But out of the corner of my eye, I could see this figure going 5 and back, 10 and back, 15 and back, 20 and back, 25 and back. And oh my gosh, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's our fitness exercise. So I pull over in a parking lot to see who it is. And sure enough, it's Mia. And I was just so impressed because between these sprints, you could see, hot air shooting from her lungs. You could see sweat flying off her brow. And, she's just on her knees because it's so exhausting to do this thing. It's one of the most aggressive fitness exercises we run here at the University of North Carolina.
Is it that ODP sprint workout? I hate that thing. I don't know what
awful. ODP does. Yeah, it's not. It is sort of a sprint, but it's more of a cardiovascular, exercise that, you're breathing really hard the whole time, and it's just so tough. And we do 10 of them. And it's just so painful. So anyway, I was just so impressed that Mia was out there. I drove into work. I scribbled a note to her. I dropped it in the mail, and I forgot about it. 10 years later, Mia wrote a book called Go for Goal.
Yeah.
If you get the book, there in the breastplate of the book was the note I'd written her. The vision of a champion is someone who is bent over, drenched in sweat, at the point of exhaustion when no one's watching. And what I was trying to communicate with that note is, everyone goes to practice. That's not going to determine who you are or who you're going to be. The kids that end up becoming extraordinary are the ones that on their own decide they're going to become great at this game. Our game is so challenging to play that unless you have mastered the ball, unless you live on a wall, unless you are playing 1v1 against your brothers and sisters and mom and dad on a regular basis, unless you're doing stuff above and beyond what you're doing in practice, you're never going to become elite. You can certainly become a good player. You can certainly become the best player in your team. But if you genuinely want to become elite, it's what you do when no one's watching that makes all the difference in the world. So I wrote that note because I really thought that that was the moment when she decided she was going to go for it. And we had a meeting earlier, sort of dealing with the same thing, because what was cool about Mia is when I recruited her, she was incredibly young. She was already playing for me on the U.S. full national team. And so I was trying to get her to come and skip her senior year to come in early to come play. And she did. So I was her legal guardian because at the time her parents had flown to Rome, because I think her dad was in the Air Force and her dad was the air attaché to the Italian government. Mia's parents wanted me to adopt her. So I did. I legally adopted her. They didn't want something to happen to her medically and then us not be able to find them. They wanted me to be able to make the decision. And as her legal guardian, I could. So we went through the legal rigmarole, and she was the older sister to all my kids, and obviously an incredible role model for us. So Mia would come by the office all the time, and I loved her. She was obviously an incredible player, but I just loved her. Sweet, sort of introverted kid that was very cerebral, though. I mean, her IQ and her ability to articulate herself was just different level, which is why she became a media darling, which is why she was in ads with Michael Jordan. I think it was a Gatorade ad that she and Michael Jordan were in the same ad where they're competing with each other. I mean, so she checked every box there. But what was really cool about this one meeting we had, I'm sitting across my desk from her, and I said, Mia, what do you want? And then she said some of the most important words she could ever say to me. She said, Anson, I want to be the best. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got her. I stood up, walked around behind her, and there was a light switch in the room, and I turned the light off and I turned it back on. Then I walked back around to my desk and I sat down. I said, Mia, this is a light switch decision, but you've got to make it every single day. And then, of course, she did. And then she became the best player in the world. And not just that, she sold our game. She was the perfect person to sell the American game because everyone wanted their daughter to be like Mia.
That's right. And like people think of that right now. You think Alex Morgan. So for those of you who didn't grow up, maybe a little bit younger than me, if you're thinking of faces of the game now, you think Alex Morgan, you think of our own St. Louis's Becky Sauerbrunn. That's who Anson's talking about right now when it comes to Mia Hamm and what she did to kind of put a face right to the game. And of course, be able to back it up with kick-ass play.
Yeah, no, that's it. And back then, the game wasn't as overwhelmingly popular as it is now. But Mia started the interest in the elite women's game and became an absolute icon and helped move the game. I mean, for all of us that are still involved in the game, you certainly have her to thank because Nike was doing big ads with her. In fact, if you go to the Nike campus in Oregon, the biggest building on campus is the Mia Hamm building. And so that's what Nike thought of the impact that Mia had in helping develop the game, but obviously also sell shoes for Nike. I mean, so it's incredible what this extraordinary young woman has done for American girls and women's soccer.
And you mentioned books, and I want to get to yours too. I want to get to your podcast and your books. But before I do, I have two questions I have to get in here. One is I saved to the end because I don't want you to hang up on me. But if you do, it'll be at the end. The first one, though, is I have to ask you, Anson, I know you coached men and you coached women. And you coached at a time where it not wasn't necessarily the cool thing to do to coach girls and women. I was coached by many great males, men who did this for us as girls, had them, of course, as young women, but it wasn't necessarily the place where many coaches, male coaches, wanted to be. Why did you bet on women? Why did you throw your hat in with the women's game? I'm glad that you did, but I'm wondering what made you go that way when many didn't.
Yeah, so when I was hired at UNC, I wasn't hired to coach women. I was hired to coach men. The guy I played for was retiring. He went in and suggested to the athletic director that they hire me, and the AD did. 3 years into men's coaching, while I was a law student, the AD said, Anson, there's a women's club on campus that's petitioned for varsity status. Do you mind vetting them for me? So I went out there, and I'm watching this women's club team play, and after they finished playing, the AD said, well, Anson, what do you think? I said, well, they're excellent. They've committed themselves. They're fit. They're committed. And now I'm shilling for the coach. And I'm saying, well, we'll certainly share facilities with them. We'll certainly share the stadium with them. Yeah, let's make them a varsity. No sooner did I say that than he says, well, Anson, if you will coach both teams, the men and women's teams at the same time, I will make your part-time men's position full-time. And I said, sure. So I've been coaching the men since 1976. I was given a women's team in 79, and then I coached both until 1989. And then I conspired with my men's assistant to split the program, and I selected the women. And I've never looked back. And honestly, it's selfish. I love coaching women. Coaching men, they fight you every step of the way, it seems. I mean, not all of them, of course. You know, there were some extraordinary young men that I coached that I just loved coaching. But there was sort of a difference. I mean, what I loved about the women is not only were they extraordinarily coachable, but, you know, they would send you a birthday card or something. And,
Thanks for kicking my ass, coach. Love you.
yeah, exactly. Or you get a Christmas card. And I just really, really enjoyed working with them. And I think they appreciated the fact that you know, I pushed them. So for me, it was a choice. And then I never envisioned that this was going to happen where we are now. But
Right? The women's game is the place to be. It's crazy.
it just took off. You're right. But I love coaching them, and so for me, it was just I just really enjoyed everything about the culture of young women. I mean, they're caring and supportive, and for me, it was just absolutely fantastic experience. And then, of course, the game took off, and it kept taking off and taking off and taking off. And I have absolutely loved. I love it now, seeing what's happening across the board. So for me, I'm so glad I made that decision, and I'm really enjoying where the women's game continues to go.
Well, and thanks in large part to people like yourself who believed in that and kept doing it when it wasn't, the cool thing. Barbara Mandrell, was it? I was country before country was cool. You were soccer before women's soccer was cool. You've got books and podcasts. I did make a promise though, Anson. I promised Ruth Harker here in St. Louis and the Gettemeyer twins, who are a big part of St. Louis soccer when it comes to women. A lot of us looked up to them, and Ruthie maybe wanted to know if it was okay if I asked that maybe you remembered that did UMSL hand UNC a defeat at one point in time? And will you please not hang up on me?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't.
It's a pretty proud thing for a team to take down, the big dog, right?
Yeah, no, they were great, and I was very impressed with them. So yeah, they certainly beat us, and I'm impressed with any team that beats us. And so they were certainly an early team that beat us, and I have nothing but respect for them and what they did, because honestly, you learn more in a loss than you do in the majority of your wins. And so the way I look at any loss is it galvanizes you. Yep. all of a sudden the players are listening a bit more intently
Yeah, they were.
after a loss. And
That's
so,
right.
yeah, so for me, I'm not, I don't basically attack the teams that beat us. I respect them. In fact, one of the coaches I respect most is Mark Krikorian, who came to Florida State back when everyone was beating them. And when he left, they were beating everyone, including us. And I think I contributed to keeping him in the game because when Michelle Kang was trying to hire him to be her sporting director with the Washington Spirit, I helped connect her with Mark because he was so good of a coach. I didn't want us to lose him from the game. So I respect the people that beat us. I certainly respect Mark. I certainly respected Umsel that beat us. And so for me, none of that stuff is embarrassing. I have nothing but respect for the teams that win and make it hard for us. And so I tip my hat to them because, yeah, they were exceptional.
Hey, Coach, I got a quick question. Just excuse me, and this pertains to maybe a little bit of the state of the union of today, the here and now. I was on Twitter this morning, or X, or whatever people call it these days, and I was scrolling, and in anticipation of this conversation, there was a post that really resonated, and I was wondering what your take is. And it was really simple, kind of given the current landscape as it pertains to NIL money and transfer portal, and some of the culture things that you were talking about earlier that appear to be diminishing to a degree. And here was the quote, the post. It was really simple. It said, "Are we in the NCAA player empowerment era or the player entitlement era?" And I just want to get your take on that because it does feel as if chaos is accelerating a little bit in the NCAAs and in soccer in particular. I just want to get your take on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, first of all, let's talk about the positives of it because there are a lot of positives. I mean, in the old days, the only people that made any money in their sports were the coaches. And yet, if you look at what's happening in basketball and in football, yeah, the coaches were making a fortune and the players were getting nothing. And yet, uh, the fans weren't coming to watch the coaches coach, they were coming to watch the players play. And so I think to some extent they were getting that side of the equation correct. If you've got a huge revenue stream in sports like football and men's basketball, then yes, share that income, with the players that are causing you to reap this huge windfall. So I think to some extent that was positive. So I have no issue with that. Obviously, I think there might have to be a cap on this eventually. Uh, but, maybe that's a constitutional issue. Maybe the reason you can't have a cap on it is because then you're interfering with someone's potential to make money. And so maybe that's the case. But what you're going to start to lose is what's called competitive equity. Competitive equity is the ability to basically compete in whatever arena that you're asked to compete in. And I think some of the incredibly rich schools are going to make it very difficult, with this competitive equity piece for the other schools to compete. And then, of course, the game loses some of its allure. So that's a concern that all of us have. And then when is it going to end? I mean, so basically, and it was so funny that we're talking about this because I was speaking to a collection of donors, and the athletes at UNC that they were supporting at a function at UNC, and there were a lot of UNC former athletes in the room, and there was a speaker before me, and he said, "All the former UNC student athletes, please stand up." And so I stood up. And there were about 6 or 7 of us in the room. The men's lacrosse coach also played at UNC, and there were a couple others in the room that also played there. And of course, we're interspersed with players and donors. And then I got up there to speak, and so I said, "What the heck?" I said, "Well, all the billionaires in the room, please stand up." And of course, no one stood up. And what I was telling everyone in the room is, well, if you want your team that you support to be successful, jump in with them. In fact, we have 28 sports at UNC. And so what I was saying is I hope there are 28 billionaires in the room. Because if each one of you would take a team, every one of the teams you would take, assuming you decided to invest in it, we would go through the roof. And we would be just separated from all the other schools in the country because of your commitment to the sport. Now, do I really think that's the way that we should go? Well, no. But for the alumni that are always concerned about the success of their teams, that's one way to do it. You can jump in as a billionaire and you can make sure your team is going to be successful. And I can't remember, and I could be getting this all wrong, so please, forgive me if I've got my information wrong. But from what I understand, the Ohio State football roster was paid approximately $20 million.
Jeez.
So I could be wrong, but from what I understand, that's sort of typical now for the elite teams. The Ohio States, the Florida States, the Clemsons, the Texases, the Alabamas. Maybe that's sort of a typical figure. But what I really, I guess, want to sort of promote is the success of Dan Hurley at the University of Connecticut in men's basketball. They're in a similar sort of position where you've got a more or less buy players, certainly in the transfer portal. And what I love about what he's done, the University of Connecticut in men's basketball is not a blue blood. We're a blue blood. Kentucky's a blue blood. Kansas is a blue blood. Duke is a blue blood. Those are the blue bloods. And so the blue bloods are in a position to genuinely recruit what we would call gold medalists. He doesn't get to recruit those sorts of kids. So who does he recruit? He recruits what he calls silver medalists. Silver medalists are different from the parents I described earlier in this conversation. The silver medalists are the ones whose parents, when they're not playing, basically say, well, yeah, if you want to play, Johnny, you got to work harder. Not the ones in the sociologist description of, well, the coach clearly doesn't like you, let's transfer. So that's the sort of parent he wants. And when he basically recruits a kid, it's not a kid who's played on 6 different AAU teams to get his minutes and get his shots. No, he recruits these kids that are loyal to their clubs and worked hard to get onto the court. And because then he knows these kids and their parents will support the mission of this kid working as hard as he can to earn his minutes on the court. So I can see both sides of this conversation. I can see that, yeah, the money shouldn't go to just the head coaches of these revenue sports. They should go to the players.
Let me ask
But I
just,
also,
let me ask a quick just follow up, because the second part of that, what I was alluding to, was a little bit of the entitlement, not necessarily the monetary one, but really the fluidity. Just, real quickly, I want to get your take on the portal itself and the effect that the portal is having, on sport and college sports in general, but soccer in particular, and the relationship between culture / loyalty / grit.
yeah, I have no issue with the transfer portal. I think in the old days, having a kid have to sit out a year was too harsh. So I don't like that. I like the fact that you can transfer and play immediately. So I like the new rules in the transfer portal. Also, I support the transfer portal. We have kids that are never going to get on the field for us, and these are kids that can get on the field in another program. And I think, yeah, those kids should jump into the portal and find a place where they can play. In fact, when we lost those 9 kids in the portal, there were a couple of kids that could have stayed and played maximum minutes. So those are the kids that I was disappointed in losing to the transfer portal. But some of the kids, they should transfer if they wanted to start and play maximum minutes. And when we lost a kid, we renamed the teams that they were playing for Tar Heels. So one of my favorite, I guess, former Tar Heels was a kid that jumped into the transfer portal that ended up playing at Vanderbilt. So we called her team, because she's a Tar Heel that transferred there, we called her team the Vanderbilt Tar Heels. And then sure enough, I was really disappointed in our NCAA seeding. We had an incredible season. We should have been a number 1 seed, and yet we weren't. I still can't get the woman that was running the seeding stuff, this athletic director or senior women's athletic director at some West Coast school, to call me back, because I was going to say, how the heck were we not a number 1 seed? But anyway, we weren't. So sure enough, we were in an unbelievably difficult bracket with all these teams that had beaten us, like BYU and Santa Clara and South Carolina. But the number 1 seed in our bracket was Florida State. You couldn't have engineered a worse bracket for us to be in than this bracket. So I was just livid because we were number 2 in the RPI. And the RPI is indicative of the strength of your schedule. We were number 2, and yet we dropped to 5 in the seeding. That's a ridiculous drop. So obviously, I think someone had their thumb on the scale, and I want to find out who, because it was just unfair to my kids. But anyway, so what happens? The Vanderbilt Tar Heels take out the Florida State Seminoles in
Whoa.
penalty kicks.
Were you so proud?
So, yes, I was excited because now we get to host the entire way to the Final Four. And if we hadn't had some other team that was a lower seed than us take them out, we would have had to fly to Florida State. We had played them twice this year, and they pounded us in both games. And I'll be completely honest, I'm not absolutely sure we would have won. Could we have won? Yeah, absolutely. Anything can happen. But, I would say they would have been favored. But the Vanderbilt Tar Heels took those mothers out. And so now, basically we're hosting the rest of the way, and it was absolutely fabulous. And so that kid, Macy Teeter, that transferred to the Vanderbilt Tar Heels, I love the kid. I texted her immediately following the Vanderbilt victory, thanking her. And I even sent a recent post that was sent about what Vandy was doing in the offseason working out. And I wanted to make sure that she thanked all of her teammates again for taking out Florida State, which paved our way to the national championship. So, yeah, I think it's important to have the portal. It's important to transfer somewhere you can play. So from that perspective, I do support it. But there are kids that feel disrespected if they're not playing maximum minutes, and yet they're playing, and now they've got to fight their way onto the field. Those are the kids that, maybe you should, stick around and just win your spot on the field because you have the talent. And so don't, get discouraged, hang in there like grim death, develop some resilience, fight your way onto the field or the court in the case of UConn basketball. And I think that's a great solution for all of us that are challenged in our environments.
Great story. And I have to tell you, Anson, I had reached out, like I told you before, to a few players, and I literally just heard from Michelle Akers, and I'm going to read you her text to me if you don't mind. She says,
Sure.
She says, hello. She says, make sure, I'm just going to read these two and you can tell me, I don't really understand them all. Ask him about his white shorts, and is it too late to bring them out of retirement into his retirement? That's question number 1. And number 2 is, she said I'd love to see him and Emily Pickering play a couple of games of pickleball against each other. I think they could sell a stadium out to that match. Do these make sense to you? What is she talking about? White shorts and pickleball.
Yeah. So back in the old days when I was coaching Michelle and anyone that I was coaching, my dad had a very simple dressing philosophy. He was a radical conservative, and so basically all you had to have was white socks and blue socks. White socks if you were playing any sort of athletic event that you would wear with your, tennis shoes or your sneakers or your soccer shoes. And then blue socks for absolutely everything else. Anytime you wore anything, a coat and tie, you would have blue socks. And the reason he shared this with me, he was trying to get me to organize myself. So when you woke up in the morning, everything was very simple. You don't have to make a lot of decisions on, your wardrobe choices because you didn't have any choices. All the socks were the same color. And then this made such sense to me. Everything I wore back in the days when I was coaching Michelle Akers was white. It would be white shirts, white shorts, and white socks. The shorts reference was back in the old days, the shorts we wore were tiny.
God, you
So,
remember? I know what you're talking about. You're talking about 70s and 80s shorts. And yes, they were shorts.
Yeah, these are tiny little shorts, and I've only got one muscle in my body, and that's my rear end. So these tiny little white short shorts were covering this enormous rear end. I don't have any upper body strength. I'm a classical. I'm going to use my rear end to protect the ball in soccer, sort of thing.
There you go.
And so I'm sure, she's, referencing the short white
Love
shorts I
it.
wore, but I wore nothing but white. So that's the white short reference. The Emily Pickering pickleball reference is way back in the old days, the first national teams. Michelle played on all of them. She was on the first national
Yeah.
team and then obviously stayed on mine. Emily Pickering was also on the first national teams. Emily Pickering played for me at the University of North Carolina, and she was an absolutely magnificent player. She sort of ran my midfield and just did a great job and, won national championships for me. She was just an absolutely superb playmaking midfielder, and she had a bit of bite to her. So she was very competitive. She was also very verbal. She had no issue, burying all of her teammates if they didn't play up to her standard. And I loved her. She was a competitor. I really enjoyed coaching her. Of course, because everyone thinks I control everything in the soccer universe, she's never been inducted into the National Soccer Hall of Fame. And of course, she's blamed me. Sort of like, the parent that, screams at the teacher when the kid comes home with all F's on the report card. And so she was obviously, I guess, brought up in the self-esteem movement and considers, me as the master of the universe and I can do anything. But of course, there's a whole committee of people that select, kids to make the Hall of Fame. And so she's been a little upset with me because she hasn't made the Hall of Fame. So I wasn't aware that Emily played pickleball, but
Oh,
I do play pickleball.
you did say that at the MAC. I didn't. We could have a competition.
Yeah, I would have no issue playing against Emily, and trust me, I wouldn't, have had any issues with competing against her, where she could take out her wrath on the fact that I haven't engineered her way onto the national team yet, and I would have absolutely no issue with that. I still have huge affection for Emily and her success for me. I even tried to recruit her daughter to come play for me at the University of North Carolina. But my affection and respect for Emily will never wane. And even if I beat her to death on a pickleball court, I would still respect her. So I would have no issue playing anyone in pickleball.
That's awesome.
Hey, Coach. I have a closing question for myself to you here,
And we are mentioning his podcast and books because he's got a lot.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Jen, you're going to bring that up in
I'll
just
do
a
it.
second. I have a question regarding kind of here the State of the Union of the U.S. Women's National Team, and in particular the effect and the vibe and the optics of the current team under the new leadership of Emma Hayes. I just wanted to get your kind of gut feelings on her early introduction to the team's response, kind of the player pool, and how she, it seems to be handling this group of players and their potential moving forward.
Yeah, first of all, she's outstanding. Years ago, she and I connected, and I can't remember all the different environments I connected with her in, but she wrote a book, and she was very complimentary. After we met, apparently I shared some things with her that resonated with her, and then I actually had her in a coaching course that the NSCAA was running in Curitiba, Brazil. And this was most of the people that came were men on this course. She was the only woman, and yet, in my opinion, she was one of the best coaches in the course. I loved her reference back to the English pro team. She had a knowledge of the game in England that just separated her from everyone in the course. But also, she was just excellent on the field, and I just had nothing but respect for her. In fact, we connected in a really good way. And later, she invited me to join a course that was being run by a Dutch coach by the name of Raymond Verheyen. It was a periodization course, and it was really, really a good course. And she was recommending me to join her in the course. And I wanted to, but it was during a year when my wife was really sick and I couldn't get away. So what I did is I asked Cindy Parlow Cohn to try to get her husband to go in my place, and I would sponsor him. And he was also into this sort of soccer periodization. And I had nothing but respect for Cindy and her husband. And so we sent John Cohn to replace me in this course. So John comes back and he's sharing with me all the different stuff he learned in the course. And that particular year, it was 2012. Cindy Parlow was working with me and my team. And so what was really cool is through her husband that had attended the course and knew the material, I was coaching my team through Cindy Parlow. So Cindy Parlow was running a lot of the sessions, and it was done through basically her husband learning about this course. And then, of course, that team ended up winning the national championship. In a post game press conference, I lauded Parlo and her husband, and indirectly Emma Hayes, for inviting me to this conference that was held in Europe. And I appreciated that. So my connections with Emma go way back. And the stuff she says about me in the book is so flattering. My wife even read her book. So I really have nothing but respect for Emma. And the job she did with our team was absolutely magnificent. I also had a really good experience with her recently. The English FA was honoring me at a game against the United States in late November, early December. And they flew me to Wembley to watch the United States play against England. And of course, I'm there in the royal box with, all these other celebrities and these dignitaries. And I'm treated like a god in England because the coach of the English team played for me. Her name is Serena Vegman. And then three of the kids that play for England, Alessia Russo, Lucy Bronze, and Lotte Wubben-Moy, also played for me. So I had players on both teams because obviously Fox and Dunn were still starters for the United States full team. But Emma had also brought in a kid that had just finished playing for me at UNC that was the number one pick in the NWSL named Ali Sentnor. So I was excited to be there. And, I knew the odds of Ali getting in were remote, but I was excited she was even on the roster. So all of a sudden, with 10 minutes to go in the game, they sub in Sentnor. I am over the moon. The game ended up a tie, which for me was very appropriate since I had players on both teams and I knew both the coaches well. So I went down because I had this incredible escort that could get me anywhere in Wembley. She took me down to the field so I could give Ali a hug as she came off the field. And on the way to the field, I ran into Emma. And I said, Emma, thanks for playing my kid. And she said, Anson, I wasn't doing you any favors. That kid kicked ass in practice. I had to play her because I wanted to win the frigging game. So it was just a wonderful compliment that she paid this sweet little kid that I loved to pieces. And then, of course, I saw Serena the whole time I was there. And so for me, it was just an incredible trip. But Emma and I go way back. We're still connected. She's going to connect with Damon Nahas. Emma texted me this morning to connect with Damon. So for me, she and I are still connected in the most positive way. And I'm very proud of everything she's done for my country and for the kids that play for her.
Well, that is a great soccer connects, right? The biggest connector. I would love to at some point in time get Emma on this show as well. But Coach, I know we have kept you for longer than I even asked you for. Appreciate that so much in your busy days. But we cannot leave the show without mentioning the fact, actually on my way in today, I listened to your podcast, the particular one with Michelle Akers, because she was my very first soccer idol. The podcast called The Vision of a Champion. That is something that you do that is really enjoyable to listen to. I want to make sure our listeners know about that, along with 3 books. So it's like you've retired, but you're still really busy. And if I've got them right, one is The Champion's Way, Unlock Your Potential and Transform Your Life. Another one, Training Soccer Champions, which you have done very much of, obviously. And then another one, The Man Watching, Anson Dorrance, and the UNC Women's Soccer Dynasty. Did I get them all? And are you doing a 4th one?
Well, actually, The Vision of a Champion is a book. And the podcast is sort of a guide to the book. So what we recommend...
thank you. Okay, so that was what I didn't catch then. So are there 4 books you have then?
Actually, yeah. Now, one of them I didn't write. One of them is basically about our culture, and it's sort of a biography. That's The Man Watching.
The Man Watching, okay.
Yeah, and one of them was written by my AI. So The Champion's Way was written by my AI and a wonderful gentleman by the name of Rich Rigg, who connected with me. And we had this chatbot, this Anson chatbot, write a book. And I am editing it right now, and I think maybe it's selling somewhere, but it's not fully edited yet. I've got to do some more work on it before I've completely finished it. But yeah, I am stunned at the chatbot. The book it wrote was extraordinary.
Holy cow!
So I sort of like that, and yeah, I'm working on 2 additional books right now. But for me, those books still have value. If you want The Cauldron, get Training Soccer Champions and the Vision of a Champion. If you want to know what I think youth players should be doing, get Vision of a Champion and listen to the podcast. 20 different people. Michelle Akers, Mia Hamm, Christine Lilly, Crystal Dunn, Tobin Heath. They're all in there with podcasts that I think they will enjoy. If you're English, Lucy Bronze is in there, one of the greatest English players of all time. And she talks about competing against Tobin in the 1v1s. When I was talking about the 1v1s earlier. So
Yeah.
all the stuff, although those all apply, but, thanks for talking about the books. I think they all have some value at some level for someone. So, if you're interested, jump in. I think it'll be an interesting and entertaining journey for you.
Perfect. Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time. We will be sure to include the links to the book and the pod in the show notes. I just want to say it was an honor to have you on the line here and hear some of these stories and peel the onion back a little bit, as they say. And just congratulations on just an incredible career. And I hope you enjoy your retirement if you haven't already. It sounds like it has a lot to do with pickleball and still soccer. So enjoy that, right?
I am enjoying it, but also I really enjoyed chatting with both of you. So this was a lot of fun for me, and I hope your podcast also takes off in a very positive way. It's clear you two guys are very easy to speak with, so I'm hoping you guys continue to do exceptionally well. So thank you for setting this up. And I had a good time. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Anson. And hopefully, like soccer tends to do, it connects us again sometime in the future. And thanks for all you've done for the women's games, not only for myself, but for my two daughters who still play. Very inspiring. And I love that they have a game now to look at that is even bigger than what we were able to. And you were a big part of that. So thank you.
Well, my pleasure.
All right.
See you guys.
Take care, Coach. Be good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Coach has exited the building.
Wow. Anson Dorrance. I mean, so honestly, I only knew him as a figurehead, right? Growing up, I know the name.
Sure.
Also, he's got an interesting name. Never heard that name before. Heard lots of stories about, and then just in a brief moment at the MAC, Jackie Billett, who we've had on this show, she and I were at the table, and she's like, "I'm going to go say hello to Anson," and I was like, "Can I please come?" And she let me come, and he is forward, as you heard in this, very direct. When I mentioned the podcast, took my phone and put his phone number in it, and it was phenomenal, and just so grateful to have his time. And we could have had him like 4 hours with all his stories.
Yeah, no.
Who's your guest like that on the Soccer Dad pod? Like, who's a guest that you could have been like, this could have been 4 hours more, and we wouldn't have even gotten everything?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is Mr. Soccer, right?
Bill McDermott, for sure.
You just kind of like turn the mic on. He sees the red light, and
then I just go to the bathroom.
Yeah, just get out of the way. No, I think, Anson clearly, everybody knows the statistics. Everybody knows the lure. Everybody knows the players, the Mia Hamms and the Loris, et cetera.
Yeah.
Everybody knows kind of that billboard side of his career. And I think when you hear him talk, because that was an hour and a half of him on here with us.
That's our longest one.
And, his enthusiasm for, the cerebral side of this game, of really digging into the culture and the themes, etc. You don't have a 47-year career and 21 national titles and untold number of pro national team players that are your
national
alum
team coach at one point in time
without having a brain that works a little bit different. And I think that's the primary takeaway. You can't replicate things like that. People have it or they don't, because every university that he had to butt heads against, like the Florida States, et cetera, they had access to all the same players, but there's a reason why he was the one that came out on top the vast majority of the time.
And doesn't he just ooze also competitiveness, right? Like there's nothing that's... Sometimes I find when we talk with, especially at the youth soccer levels, there's often this kind of thought that you have to be one or the other. You can be cerebral and think about the integrity and all those things, or you can be a competitor, and then in fact you can do both, and you will do better with both. I mean, I almost think in some ways he was more passionate about the call, not just the stuff they do in the cauldron with skills and drills, but all those core values seem to be just as important, if not more so.
Well, I can't imagine, go back to the original point, can't imagine if you put him and Mr. McDermott at a table, probably about 3.4 years later.
Bill gave me some questions too. So I mean, I dig in for questions.
Anyway,
Ted Williams provided questions so great. So I mean as I spoke to my kids, and I was nervous yesterday about interviewing him, and they were like, why is that a big?
Well, he's your bucket list,
right? It is a bucket list, and trying to explain to them in their current terms, like here, who would you be nervous to talk to, and to just say that, when it comes to a GOAT, right, in coaching, when it comes to somebody who laid the groundwork when it wasn't necessarily cool to like women's sports and soccer in general, when there was people there kind of driving the boat and paving the way, he was there doing it, and so just really honored that he came on here.
Well, that's that.
That's my day. That's all I can do today.
Yeah, you're just gonna.
I'm gonna go meet Ruth Harker now at Trainwreck, and
oh my God,
the rest of the day is screwed.
A feral afternoon.
Yes, it will be.
So they say. See you next time.
See you next time. After you, I forgot the last one. I got a little into it with Kristen Carver and forgot to say like, review, follow, share, subscribe. Like when you do the clicky thing, I like it I have a Mac, so on my computer it just says new podcast dropping.
Yep.
And I don't have to think about it. I just click it.
There you go.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Have a good one.
See you, people.